and I have been working on strategy execution for many years, and we have been trying to put together a presentation that summarizes what we've learned. And that's what today's webinar is about. It's about what we've learned over 25 years working in 40 plus countries and training some 10,000 folks plus in a balanced way of doing strategic planning and management. Some of the observations that we've come across over the years, the literature and the folks who are practitioners talk quite a bit about strategy execution in the context of really three areas: leadership and culture and change management and project management. Those three topics seem to dominate the conversation around strategy execution. We've concluded that those are necessary but not sufficient, and we've identified 5 areas that we think are more representative of how to get better at strategy execution. So we take a more practical approach to it rather than an academic approach. And we're going to treat strategy execution as a process. And we've identified a number of tools and techniques and interventions that we have used over the years in our consulting experience to help organizations improve the execution or the implementation of strategy. So the 5 areas that we're going to talk to you about today are leadership and governance, change management to create a performance culture, strategy-focused alignment, organizational alignment, and process improvement, strategic project portfolio management, and performance analysis, reporting, and informing. And in each of those 5 areas, we'll present some sample tools and techniques that we have found useful to help improve your chances of success with regard to implementing your strategy. One of the key takeaways for us over the years of doing this is that strategy execution isn't just the responsibility of a strategy management office. And the process starts much earlier than after the strategic plan is written. In our approach, we're going to start thinking about strategy execution on day one, when we're creating the strategy, developing a strategy, and writing a strategic plan. So we're going to move the timeline back to the left and start thinking about how we can improve the implementation of strategy as we're actually creating the strategy and writing the strategic planning document. This is a short version of a new course that we've created. I've been working on it for 5 years. It is now ready, and we have been teaching it in the Middle East, in the Caribbean, and in North America for the last couple of months. It's a 4-day certification course with the newest edition for the Strategy Management Group Balanced Scorecard Institute. So I'll talk a little more about that at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. A few notes, housekeeping notes. We're recording the webinar. I'm going to email you a link to view the replay within a couple of days. We'll provide a PDF handout of what we're showing today. And if you want to get some questions, if we have time at the end of the webinar, hope we do, do not use the chat box. Go ahead and use the question and answer box, please. And we'll be looking at those as we go on. As I mentioned, Angela and I have been working on this collectively and individually for a number of years. And our background is both in the private sector, the public sector, and not-for-profits, and quasi-government. The tools we're going to share with you work for an organization of any size. Personally, I've applied these tools in an organization of 10, a lobbying group in Washington, D.C., up to a military organization of 150,000 men and women. So it's quite scalable, and the logic of the process, I think you'll see, is we'll be able to carry forward to your organization. Our material is now taught in 7 languages, and we've worked with something over 300, near 400 organizations in all continents around the world to help folks create a more balanced strategy and to be able to implement the strategy that they have created. So what are some of the mistakes folks make when they're trying to do strategy execution? And these are just, we have a really long list, but these are the ones that sort of jump off to us. It's a lot of emphasis on planning, and folks don't think near enough about what Project Management Institute calls benefit realization, what we call focusing on results. There's an awful lot of time that goes into the planning side of the ledger, and not nearly as much as how are we going to make sure that we get the results that we want. We see an awful lot of strategic plans, the written documents that are just a list of outputs and projects and activities, the stuff that we're going to work on. And there's very little conversation in there about goals and the path and the plan, the strategy for achieving them. That's probably the most common thing that I've seen. I've worked in something over 60 countries, maybe 70 countries over the course of my career. And this is the one that jumps out at me almost all the time. How many strategic plans are almost devoid of strategy? Poor communication below the executive level. We see that a lot also. You know, everybody in the executive level, what I call the 7th floor, gets it. And then you start going down the floors, down the different levels in the organization, and not as many folks are on board because the message changes or is not delivered very clearly at all. We see vision statements that, you know, sound nice. They have flowery words, but they're open to different interpretations and with no clear goals associated with the vision. Poor alignment, you know, we'll have a nice, clean, slick looking strategic plan document, but when you get down to the business units and the support units, the operational units in the organization, there's very little connection between what the business units say is their mission and vision and what the organization has set for its corporate mission and vision. Many organizations, too many projects, and not really connected to the strategy of the organization. So we're going to work on the gap. What we've identified is a gap in strategy development and strategic planning, the left side of the ledger, and what we see when we see successful implementations of the strategy. And we're going to try and offer you some ideas on how we can fill those gaps. I mentioned these 5 imperatives earlier. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about tools, techniques, and interventions that you can use to create projects and portfolios that are more strategic, create a more high-performance organization, make better use of performance information to inform decision-making, operationalize the strategy by aligning the organization around strategy, and a foundational imperative, getting engaged leadership and governance. I mentioned earlier that we view strategy execution as a process, and we see strategy as the common link that connects the different elements of that process. So it's basically 3 major phases, if you will. One is what I call the discovery process, where we're looking at who our customers are and what their needs are, our stakeholders, what do they need, what's the environment within which our organization operates, you know, what are future thoughts and scenarios that will influence the choices we make for strategy, what are the risks and what are our mitigation strategies, and how do we identify the value proposition for our customer based on our capacity and capability to deliver what they need. So that's a strategic thinking process, and that is the front end to what I call the storytelling, the strategic planning process. And here the elements of strategy that are important are the vision and the mission, core values, the actual strategic themes and results or priorities, strategic priority areas, key performance indicators, and then a set of prioritized strategic initiatives that help identify what the organization should be working on to be successful. We'll create a balanced strategic plan, which will be the communication tool for leaders and managers to communicate throughout the organization what the intent is, and then a change management plan, recognizing that strategic planning and strategy execution are very much about changing hearts and minds and creating a, excuse me, a transformation in the organization. Implementing our strategy deals with the elements I've mentioned: alignment, engaged leadership, creating a performance culture, operationalizing the strategy at the business and support unit level, informing decision-making with performance information, and aligning projects and portfolios to the strategy. So I mentioned earlier we want to start strategy execution early. What we've found over the years is that the organizations that do a good job on the front end tend to do a good job on the back end. And so we're going to start thinking about strategy execution earlier than most practitioners do. So what are some tools and techniques that we can use to build a strong foundation for strategy execution? We like to use an inventory. I call it a strategy elements inventory to provide a baseline for improvements. This looks at what the organization currently has, the components of a balanced strategy, balanced strategic management, right? And it compares what they currently have against some best practices. We wrote a book about this 10 years or so ago called The Institute Way, and one of the appendixes is something called Characteristics of Good, where based on our experience, we developed a set of, what I call practices that work, what we've seen over the course of our careers that are good. I'm not going to say they're best practices because I haven't seen every practice, but they certainly do represent a group of organizations that perform at a higher than normal level. So we'll take an inventory, just a simple spreadsheet, and identify where there are gaps in what the organization currently has in its elements and where improvements need to be made. And this then becomes the basis of the rest of the conversation, the rest of the work to try and build a more balanced organization. Facilitated workshops, we have found, work much better than giving this assignment to a strategic planning office and tell them to go away and come back with a strategic plan. What essentially you're doing is building buy-in from the folks who are going to have to carry your water after the strategy is developed. And it's a noticeable difference because I used to do it the old way, which was head of strategic planning office and go off for the weekend with the best and the brightest and write a document and then wonder why very few people followed it after we announced it with great fanfare. The reality is those folks hadn't bought in. It was our strategic plan, not their strategic plan. So we're trying to make strategy everybody's job. And the best way to do that is with facilitated workshops and lots of posted notes and lots of conversation and folks who do not work with each other necessarily. You bring people from different levels of the organization. I like to call them the different voices in the organization to talk about common interests and processes and programs and activities. Another tool we like is something called a strategy profile. What this does is lead to conversations about what should we be focusing on. This is an example taken from Southwest Airlines when they 50 years ago were taking a regional airline and turning it into a national and an international airline. And what they did was focus on the things that were most important to differentiate themselves from other airlines. Work on the differentiators, get really good at those, and then folks will start choosing you because the differentiators are important to them. So it's a very good tool for getting a team focused on the stuff that matters the most to customers. Strategy map is one of the best tools that we've come across in the last 25 years. It really facilitates strategic conversations. When you look at the four different perspectives, the top two perspectives, the financial and customer stakeholder are your results perspectives, and the driver perspectives are business processes and organizational capacity. And by creating actionable strategic objectives, and that's what the ovals are here, with action verbs in front of them, folks start to get an idea of how the value creation process works in your organization. How do we create value for our customers? Now, if we're doing a consulting or training for a nonprofit or government, we would switch the top two perspectives. Because in the case of a government or mission-driven organization, a nonprofit or quasi-government, the end of the value chain is not profitability for shareholders, it's customer stakeholder cost effectiveness. How effective are the programs are delivering? How effective are we at meeting our mission goals and so on? So we would switch those top two perspectives in that case. Here's an example for Susan Komen out of Dallas, Texas. They renamed the strategy map their promise map, identified a series of strategic objectives that would help move Susan Komen worldwide into the future. It was very powerful, and at an all-hands meeting with several hundred people, the CEO walked up on the stage. We'd prepared a 4-by-8-foot poster board with the strategy map on it, and she signed her name to the strategy map and then invited everybody else in the room to sign their names as a way of getting commitment to the new path for the organization. Very powerful way of changing hearts and minds. Another tool that we like a lot is this thinking of strategy from an altitude point of view, with mission and vision up there at 10,000 meters, and then perspectives and the strategic themes or priorities, pillars of excellence, if you will, mid-level and all the way down to measures and strategic initiatives at the ground level. And by thinking of things logically and connecting the pieces, we end up making a logical connection between our aspirations, our mission and our vision, and the things that we're going to work on, the strategic initiatives, to implement that mission and vision at the corporate level. And then the cascading and the alignment would come off of this corporate logic. The one-page balanced strategic plan is the way we like to write a strategic plan. It really is one page. We can have backup to it, but the idea is to communicate in one page what it is that you are about in terms of creating value for your customers and your stakeholders. This is for a natural gas organization that we worked with some time back. So the strategic intent is captured in the vision and the mission and the strategic themes and a set of strategic results. You might call them strategic goals. We do want to make sure that we use words consistently. One of the other big mistakes we find is that organizations tend to change definitions. And if one person's goal is another person's objective, we immediately have a communications problem. So words matter. And at a minimum, choose a common set of words in your strategic planning and strategy execution journey, so folks don't get confused as you go up and down the levels of the organization. So the strategy map shows how we visualize strategy to tell our value creation story. We'll identify a set of performance measures or KPIs to measure the progress in those strategic objectives. And then we'll identify a small set of strategic initiatives that will help close the gap between the performance level that we're at in those objectives and the level that we would like to be sometime in the future. Down at the bottom, our core values are foundational to the strategy map. One of the nice things you get out of a balanced strategy is that it helps inform the budget process. Typically we've talked about capital investments and operating expenses. The third category is something called StratEx, strategy execution dollars. And by identifying strategic initiatives and putting a fence around those at the start of the budget formulation process, we actually identify a few 6 to 9 to 12 maybe, high performance or highly important enterprise-wide initiatives that we think are going to significantly impact the results of the organization. So when we finish the one-page strategic plan and the supporting documentation, we're ready to roll out the strategy, the balanced strategy, at an all-hands meeting and communicate so that everybody gets on board at approximately the same time. So the rollout consists of communicating the strategic plan, implementing the change management plan, informing the budget process, setting up for alignment, strategic alignment through the strategic objectives, and then managing the process of strategy implementation. Angie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Howard.
Yeah.
I will take it up from here. And so we're going to look at what is involved in terms of the strategy execution. And some of the areas that we really need that we look at and focus on to improve that strategy implementation process. What we're going to take you through are some of the tools, some of the techniques, and some of the areas that we have found are important for successful execution. And starting with senior leadership, looking at how engaged are the leadership teams that are leading the strategy execution process. And senior leaders should maintain a very clear strategic focus in terms of looking at making sure that the organization remains focused on the strategic areas, but more so making sure that all employees in the organization are involved in developing and executing the strategy so that there's ownership. Senior leaders, and when we're looking at senior leaders, we're looking at, it could be the executive team, it could be the senior management team, being able to provide that high visibility and being seen to be active in terms of how they engage on a day-to-day on the strategy and the execution process. Senior leaders should assume personal accountability. They should demonstrate that they own the strategy because they own and are responsible for the delivery. And one of the things that we have found is when the senior leadership team is involved, it's very easy for decisions to be made around the strategy during the execution process. And that decision-making facilitates overcoming obstacles that may be part of the process. As a senior leadership team, it's important to operate regularly, meeting regularly, looking at where things are in terms of the process, and also just really working effectively as a senior team. And a very important area for senior leadership is making positive use of measuring and managing the strategy. So keeping track of where things are in the execution process and making sure that we're getting closer and closer to achieving success. And so what we see is that when senior leadership are involved and members of the senior leadership team are involved in execution, we find that that active, that personal involvement, that visible leadership results in achieving success in the execution process, because when the leadership team is involved, everybody can see that there is commitment at that level. And so engaged leadership is a foundation for strategy execution. The other area that we have found is important is related to change and how it talked about change earlier. The change process in strategy execution is critical in terms of managing change so as to develop a performance culture. And employees need to understand that change is going to happen. Change is inevitable. And for change to happen, it means that as senior leaders, as senior managers, we walk the talk and make sure that we are part of that change process. But change, when we're executing strategy, change also means that everybody in the organization, all the employees in the organization need to understand, why are we changing? What is changing? How is that change going to affect me? And being able to answer the question, what's in it for me? And when we're able to answer that question, then there is buy-in in the strategy execution process, and you find that there's energy and people want to get involved. But for that to be successful, it's important that we ensure that employees are trained. And this is where, when we're implementing strategy, we, for instance, introduce change champions into the process and give them any infrastructure that is necessary, tools and infrastructure that are necessary to help implement the change process as part of the strategy execution process. So that area there, change, that commitment to change, to drive a performance culture, is an area that is critical in the strategy execution process. And related to that is what we call the Golden Rules checklist, which is related to communicating strategy. One of the things that we've seen is that there needs to be ownership of the communication process. And that ownership comes through the demonstration of communicating strategy. Could be through developing a communication plan that is rolled out as part of the strategy execution process. And in the communication strategy, ensuring that the message that is being relayed is consistent at all levels. So we're sharing the same message. It's a clear message. It's a simple message. And that communication about the strategy is done on a regular basis, so that it's not a one-off event that happens at the launching stage. But what happens is that when we're executing, the communication takes place regularly so that people continue to be connected throughout the execution process. And to do that, we've seen that it's necessary and important to select what kind of media are we using for communication within the organization about the strategy and execution process. Who are the messengers? And really identifying who those people are, and also determining how often do we talk about strategy? How often do we keep people updated on what's happening in terms of our strategy, what has been accomplished, and what we're looking to do? And as part of the communication, one of the things that we found to be very successful is involving middle-level managers to help translate the strategy into language that everybody understands, and bringing it down to different levels within the organization. So in a way that simplifies the messages, simplifies the way strategy is understood, and that way builds in on the buy-in. And most importantly, never forget what's in it for me. And when we're using middle-level management to be able to translate that strategy, that what's in it for me question is answered, because people then start to understand, why am I doing this? Why are you telling me these things about the strategy? And how can I get involved? The third area that we use and have found to be critical in the execution of strategy is alignment. And alignment starts at the top, essentially looking at the corporate level, the strategic objectives that we have at the corporate level, and cascading those objectives down to our business and support unit levels, and down to the individual or personal objective levels. And with cascading, when the cascade is done well and done properly, what happens then is that you achieve the alignment, And as a result, when people understand their personal objectives, that drives performance, and that performance is seen at the business and support unit level, and then finally at the corporate level. A technique that we apply and we found to be very useful and successful is what we call the fishbone diagram. And the fishbone diagram is a tool that we use when we're looking at aligning and improving customer-facing processes. And the fishbone diagram really addresses the root causes of challenges or issues that may be in the processes. But one of the things that we see it's used for is, for instance, when we're delivering strategy, one of the things that we want to see is operational excellence. And one of the results that we want to see as far as customers are concerned, for instance, is high quality products are delivered on time. Now, the focus is on the customer and improving customer satisfaction. Some of the things that we want to see when we're improving customer satisfaction is that customers are recommending us, customers are loyal, and there is customer satisfaction, and that can be measured with specific measures. Now, all of this is driven by processes within the organization and within the customer area. And so the fishbone diagram helps us to, and helps organizations to really break down what are those processes that will help us deliver on improving customer satisfaction. And in each of those, the steps in those processes, what are we going to see and how can we measure? So this is a technique we strongly recommend and we use, and we've seen to be successful in the execution process because it really helps us to break down those customer-facing processes that help us deliver value to the customer. The next technique and tool that we use and is critical and important is managing projects and making project management a focus in the strategy execution process. And the portfolio or project management process has 5 steps, and we start from the strategic level where we identify and select the projects that are going to be the strategic projects that will have an organizational-wide impact, or what we call an enterprise-wide impact. And at selection and initiation, which is stage 1, this is where, as an organization, during strategy execution, we identify the projects, and then you look at what are some of the benefits of each project, and what are some of the risks of the projects, and which of these projects, therefore, is strategic enough to go forward as a strategic project. And those are then prioritized and funded, and then we develop the strategic project charters that help with the implementation of those projects. And so this is to show that when we're looking at execution and selecting the strategic projects, it's important to take them through the selection and initiation stage, plan the projects, execute the projects, measure performance of the projects, and then have a specific project close where we look at the lessons learned and really then determine how successful have our strategic projects been in the delivery of our strategic plan. The next tool that we use are the performance measures, and performance measures inform decision making. A lot of the times when we're executing strategy, we look at measures and sometimes derive measures from Google and various sources, but we say that there's a better way of doing this. And one of the things that we say is ask the questions that are related to performance, the questions around what are we trying to accomplish? How will we know success when we see it? How will we monitor and report performance using simple, easy to understand information that informs decision making? And so we can use a combination of measurements by starting with operational measures, which are related to project measures. And operational measures look at input, process, and outputs. And then we have our strategic measures, which look at intermediate outcomes, where we can measure intermediate outcomes and measure the end outcome. And that helps us with the reporting on the performance of our strategy or the execution of our strategy. So one of the things here to keep in mind is that performance measurement as part of the execution process is critical. It helps us in the decision-making process, but then it's important to use both operational measures or project measures and strategic measures as well. And here I'll hand back to Howard just to take us through the next bit.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Let's summarize some conclusions, and then I think we'll have time for some questions. We see strategy execution as a process, and the beginning step of that process, it does not start after the strategic plan is written. It really starts as part of a strategy development and planning step. And you're going to end up in a much better place if you think of strategy execution on the left side of the ledger rather than on the right side of the ledger, I like to say. With a disciplined process, you're going to have more disciplined conversations. You're going to have more strategic conversations, and you'll be able to apply a set of tools, techniques, and interventions that will improve your odds of success with strategy execution. You've probably seen a lot of the tools that Angela and I have shown you before, and we've repurposed some of the historic tools, like the Ishikawa diagram as a fishbone diagram, right? Originally used for a different purpose. And what we found is, when you look over the sort of the history of tools that people have used to help us practitioners get better at our craft, many of them are multifaceted and can be used for different purposes because they're logical and they're straightforward, they're simple to understand, and they really do help with a discipline. Another takeaway, I guess, is that strategy execution is really a change initiative, isn't it? I mean, it's about changing hearts and minds, as Angela said. I mean, you really have to think about creating a high-performance organization and using strategy as the thread to be able to do that. Strategy execution is everyone's job. It's not just the role of a strategy management office or a project management office. And that's another, I guess we could have added that to the challenge slide. People assume that if you set up an overhead office called a strategy management office, that it's their job and responsibility to make strategy execution better. And the reality is it's all of our jobs. If you're a program manager or a project manager or, in charge of activities or tasks, whatever it is, if you think about strategy as a focus for the organization and making sure that what you do connects with the greater good, then strategy execution really is everybody's job. And while the role of the SMO is important, a lot of organizations don't have SMOs. So what they do is look at the functions of an SMO and make sure that those get assigned to managers and other folks responsible and accountable for results. So again, the discipline process, starts with a corporate strategy and produces a strategic budget. It translates strategy into operations, the programs, the projects, the service areas, and so on to create operational budgets, and then goes down to the individual level. 3 tiers: corporate strategy, aligning organizations or aligning business and support units to corporate strategy, and then aligning the personal goals of individuals. When you're doing at the individual, at what we call tier 3, make sure that you look at the position descriptions of the individuals and find at least 1 or 2 tasks that they do that are strategy related, and that will help you align individual personal goals with the strategy of the departments or units that they are working for, and then create individual development plans so that folks have a opportunity to grow and to move up the line. One of the things that we do in the new course, it's a 4-day strategy execution certification course, is to help delegates create what we call a strategy execution roadmap, so they can go back to their organization after the course with a plan of action. And so the categories that we use in each one of those 5 imperatives, we break the imperatives into components, and then we identify a desired outcome for an individual's organization. What's the current status? Take a snapshot, a baseline, if you will. The next column is what are some challenges to getting better? And then what are some improvements based on the tools, techniques, and interventions that you've learned about in the class? Who's going to be the owner of those improvements? And then what's the priority that we assign to it? So by having a family of slides here, 5 in each of these areas, you essentially end up with a plan for proceeding with making strategy execution more strategy focused and increasing the odds of success. That course is available now. It's taught online and in person and on site. We're also working on a 2-day course. We'll have that first quarter of 2025. This will be more for executives and managers. We call it Strategy Execution Essentials. And something else we've been working on for a very long time, we're getting very close to releasing it. For some of you, you may know that we built something called a strategic management maturity model. We probably built that 15 years ago and have been using it with organizations around the world to baseline where they are relative to best practices. We've created version 2.0, and we're going to tie that to an award for excellence for organizations that show improvement in their baseline and then produce results based on tools, techniques, and interventions that are available to them. So this is a way of baselining and comparing your organization to worldwide best practices. Okay, I think we have some time for some questions. Angela, let me take a look at what we have here. How can individual contributors support the strategy execution roadmap? One of the key things is to create teams. As you could tell from that facilitated workshop slide I showed earlier, we're really firm believers in creating teams of individuals to attack these issues, whether it's building a strategic plan or improving a process or creating performance measures. We have found great benefits to, they don't have to be large teams. You know, we'll do performance measurement teams with 3 or 4 individuals, but never with one individual. You know, the idea is to get the different voices in the organization in the conversation, and then they can carry that learning back to whatever level of the organization they're in. So individual, contributors support the roadmap by being part of a team and taking ownership of part of it. How do you communicate what is a KPI? How do you go about updating the KPIs? Who should be coordinating this? I mean, that's an organization specific answer. It depends whether you have set up a SMO / PMO or some organization, some central organization to coordinate performance information reporting. How you communicate it, simpler is always better. We have a whole course on creating meaningful performance measures, a KPI certification course to teach you how to do it the way we think is the right way to do it, rather than looking them up in a book or asking your AI software, what should I measure? The discipline of doing that just like the discipline of creating a balanced strategic plan, is really powerful. You know, folks learn a lot. They learn about the inputs to their work and the outputs that go to somebody else's work. So it's really it's an education process for folks to get involved in these teams. So, I encourage process improvement teams, or the equivalent, not just for process improvement, but for the other elements that we have talked about in the strategic planning and management cycle. Let's see. Let me look at some other ones. Angela, any other comments or thoughts?
Yeah, there are a couple of a few questions here maybe that I can try and answer. There's a question on how do you align strategy with structure? And one of the ways to do that is by looking at the structure the organizational structure that you have in place, and then being able to ensure that the strategy is cascaded to departments and units within the organization. So depending on the structure that exists, is really looking at how does each department, division, or unit contribute to the strategy, and that alignment with strategy is achieved through the cascade process, which we talked about earlier. There's another question here about how can a middle manager without direct reports contribute to bridging the gap between strategy and operational performance? And if a middle manager doesn't have direct reports, they can develop their objectives that align to the strategic objectives. And one of the things that we do and we have done is creating the scorecards at that middle management level that allows a middle manager to be part of the strategy delivery, even if they don't have direct reports within their structure or their department. Let's see.
There's one more, Angela, while you're looking, somebody commented that they didn't see a OKR framework in our presentation. We have a separate course on OKRs, and what we recommend is to make sure that the OKRs are tied to strategic objectives. A lot of times our observation is that they sort of take a life of their own, at the operational level of the organization. But if you take the time to, create those with a view of strategy above you, we think the results are much better. You get a fewer set of measures, and measures that help you measure results, not just the individual tasks, or the tasks are tied to the results that you want with the OKR. So it's compatible. The other thing I'd comment on, I didn't use the words balanced scorecard once in this organization. Strategy execution, the way we're presenting it here, is not dependent on you having a balanced scorecard system. There's other management frameworks that folks use, and what we try to do is learn from all of our work on balanced scorecard. But most of us have been working with many other frameworks. I think I counted mine up one time, and it was up over 30 different planning, management, and measurement frameworks that I've been associated with over the many decades I've been doing this. And what we wanted to do was find sort of the generic version of strategy execution that you could apply, irrespective of which management system you were using. Let's see, some other questions.
A few questions. Maybe I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
Take a few. Once you've established a strategy, who would be invited to review it in the next year? Who would be invited to review it in the next year? So typically what we see is the leadership team that was involved in its development. And then in that team, you can add managers or process owners who've been involved in the execution of the strategy through the year, because then they can contribute to reviewing the review process. So it doesn't have to be a very big group, but a critical group in terms of those who have been involved and contributed to its execution. Another question here is, let's see. 1 second.
Let me pick up one, Angela, while you're looking there. Vindra asks, how can a middle manager without direct reports contribute to bridging the gap between strategy and operational performance? If I were alone in an organization without direct reports, I would try and present to the people above me, what's wrong that needs to be fixed, or what opportunities need to be captured that we're not capturing. And the reason I put it that way, when I talk to senior executives, I'm always interested in two sides of the coin. Number one, what keeps you up at night, right? That's the challenges, obstacles, resistance question. What's wrong that needs fixing? And the other side of that coin is, what benefits can you capture if you used a more disciplined approach to thinking about balance and internal versus external, and strategic versus operational, and project versus portfolio. There's a lot of different balances that come into play when we talk about balanced strategy. So the other side of the coin is, what are the benefits that could accrue to your organization, really to your employees, if you adopted a more balanced approach to thinking about strategy. Unfortunately, in our world, there's not always an ROI that you can associate with this kind of stuff. I often get asked, how's my ROI going to improve if I hire you to do a balanced scorecard? And my answer always is, there are usually a lot of things that go on in an organization at the same time. There's change initiatives, and it's really hard to ascribe a percentage number improvement to one particular thing that you're doing. But I can tell you what will happen, okay? Your employees will be more engaged. They will identify the what's in it for me that they might not have today. You'll have more in-depth conversations about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish. You will think differently about the way you satisfy customers and the way the projects and programs and tasks support that. You'll have a better, instead of an argument by vigorous assertion for your budget, you'll have a much stronger analytical underpinning for budget choices that you have to make, whether they're mission-driven programs or government programs or private enterprise, new markets, right, and new activities. You'll have a much better set of performance measures that are actually meaningful, that will inform decision making. So there's a lot of benefits that you're going to get out of thinking more balanced about the way you approach management and leadership. All of that, if you're a middle manager, to get back to Vindra's question, if you're a middle manager, frame your messaging that way would be my advice, and make a case to the leadership, to your manager, that there's some things we can do that'll make a difference. Another question that he asked was, what strategies, tools can be used to influence and align cross-functional teams when you don't have direct authority over them? Again, one of the key things is getting leadership, as Angela said, engaged in this process. And that does not mean the leader giving a PowerPoint presentation and leaving the stage. I mean, what it means is, leaders who are actively helping eliminate resistance, eliminate obstacles to improvement, what we call leaders walking the talk. So, to build these cross-functional teams and not be isolated on an island, you have to convince other folks of the merits of your cause. And the best way I found to do that is by looking at the benefits we're missing, or the pains that we're suffering, and frame your conversation in those terms. Angela?
We can take a few more. Okay, there's Elizabeth Mutiso, who's asked, balanced scorecards versus KPI, is there a difference? The balanced scorecard contains the KPIs. So that is where where you place the KPIs when you're developing the scorecard. Another comment here is
Let me add something on that, Angela. Many of the organizations, when the balanced scorecard first came out in the mid 1990s, thought of the balanced scorecard as strictly a performance measurement framework. That was the original design, to add learning and growth measures into other measures that organizations were using. They tended to use mostly financial if they were in the private sector. So, you know, the original work at Harvard was to create another view that said, well, there's things that are important, the drivers of future financial performance. How are we going to measure those? Over time, the balanced scorecard took on a different, a different look. It became more of a strategic management system, and KPIs were important to that, but they weren't the only thing that you get out of it. As we talked about, getting balanced mission and vision and strategic themes and strategic objectives. That's what the balanced scorecard as a strategy management system brings to the table, that the original balanced scorecard as a KPI framework did not bring to the table. So Angela is absolutely correct. The KPIs are still important in a balanced scorecard, but they're certainly not the only thing. And I would say over the years, most of our clients that we have worked with started with a KPI balanced scorecard framework, thinking that it was just about measures. And when we broadened their thinking to think about it as more of a strategic management system, not just a KPI framework, sort of the world opens up and you see the different things that this more balanced approach can bring to an organization.
and there's maybe just a few 2 or 3 minutes. There's a comment from Lawrence. Shona, is it possible to always make practical references to examples you have given in your presentation as having been found successful? Otherwise, this might appear theoretical. Thank you, Lawrence. We shall introduce examples. The strategy execution course does draw in a lot of real examples from experience. So that is one place where you will be able to experience and just hear what other organizations have done. There's another question: does vision necessarily have to be time bound? I think here perhaps the way I'd answer this is by saying, because a vision is a picture of success, that picture of success may be accomplished in 3 years, in 5 years, in 7 years. So in terms of being time bound, it's perhaps asking the question, have we achieved that or achieved that picture of success? And therefore, how long has that taken? In some organizations, we see the vision could be 3 years, it could be a 5-year, it could be a 7-year, it could be longer. Howard, any last ones for you?
No, I think that's it. We're at 8:59. I appreciate everybody's time, and hopefully you've learned a few new things, or got an idea for a new tool or technique that you could try. Just a comment on why don't we have more examples? We end up with a very long webinar, a very long presentation if we put examples in on every one of the tools. But as Angela said, there are practical examples, and delegate discussions and workshop meetings around the use of the tools, so that you're going to get some practical experience to actually use the tools, not just learn about the theoretical basis of the tools. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. Have a nice day.